So I was asked to give some tips for Pincha Mayurasana, which in English we call it forearm stand. And the request I was asked was for tips for getting into the pose and also to staying there, which I think it's actually much more difficult. At least it was more difficult for me. And so I'll try to do it as concise as I can and just give you a few tips. And then soon I'm gonna post also a complete sequence, kind of like, I don't know, 45 or 1 hour sequence to work towards Pincha Mayurasana. So if we're looking into how to get into the pose, then naturally it requires strength and it requires also flexibility. Okay, flexibility around the shoulders, but also to be able to get into the pose in a way that is with less jumping, that requires less strength, then we need more flexibility. So it's always kind of like a balance that we work with. And naturally, those of us who have more strength will be able to lean more into that, and those of us who have more flexibility will be able to lean into that. I do recommend that wherever you are in that range of flexibility and strength, you come towards one another, right? So if you're very, very strong, but flexibility is a bit more difficult for you, then work a bit more on your flexibility. Don't only lean into and trust your strength, because if we put the pose aside also, then it's just a much healthier way to live your life and to move just in this world, yeah? And by the way, also for this pose I find, so the same goes for flexibility, yeah? So there are different ways to enter the pose, and the typical way of entering the pose is one foot after the other, one leg after the other. And so if we place the forearms parallel and we make sure that the elbows are just below the shoulders, not too wide, please, preferably even a bit less, a bit narrower, just because usually it comes a bit out. And then from here, we're gonna make sure that the knees are close, relatively close to the elbows. And the reason for that is that if I'm lifting my buttock up now, right, it doesn't matter if I can straighten my legs as I am doing right now, or I don't have the flexibility and I need to keep the knees a bit bent. But as you can see, my hip is quite close to be just on top of my shoulders and my elbows. And this is what we want to find in inversions in general, and definitely in Pincha Mayurasana. We want a certain stacking of the bones, and the more they stacked one over the other, the less strength you actually need for it, and to come into it and also to stay there. And so if, for example, if my knees will go far like so, and then I will start to try to come up, then I have such a long way to reach, and it's really difficult. So if I try from here to come up, I'm gonna have to give a really big push to do so, right? And so the closer you are to your elbows, the easier it is to come up, okay? To come up. I will say the softer it is you're coming into the pose, okay? So I don't know if it's easier or not, that's really a matter of your body. And so from here, I'm gonna lift one leg, any leg that works for you best, but you always work with both legs. And then you can see now that my legs are basically in kind of like a standing split, which this is where the flexibility comes. If I have that, it'll be easier for me to lift, shift the weight forward and lift, and then slowly bring the other leg next to this one, right? If I don't have the flexibility, then what I would need to do is I would need to give a bit more of a jump, yeah? Which is okay, okay? So this is why the more we work on both, the easier it is, okay? So the first thing that we know is that we talked about is letting the hip, or bringing the hip as close as you can to your shoulders. So the lift, the kick would be the smaller kick, okay? That would require the least amount of force. That's one. Second thing that we talked about is, again, working on the flexibility of the legs, yeah, the more, and with that we can work on splits, we can work on many other things. So the work on the split will help us, because if, for example, you see, let's say that I wouldn't have the flexibility, that I can only do this, right? Then I need to really lift, shift forward until I can actually bring myself into this. And then when I do that with the jump, then I need much more force in my shoulders and all the supporting muscles of the shoulder blades and shoulder girdle to catch myself, right? And so this is the reason. So this is in terms of coming up. Now there is a few ways of working on coming up. So sometimes it's very difficult to come up with the forearms parallel, and so we can do it in a few ways. One way is to simply interlace your fingers. Yeah, now make sure that your little pinky, the bottom one, is not staying like so, but you put it in, just like so, just like when we do a headstand, yeah? And so this way the forearms will be well balanced on the ground. Your forearms will be on the ground, and I suggest that you actually really kind of push your wrist or the roots of your palms against one another, and that would help you, will give you some more badha, some connection, right? Connection not only of the hands to one another but also to the ground. The other thing that you want to really think of is pushing the forearms down into the ground and feeling how that push of the energy down is helping you to feel that energy bouncing up, right? Just like think of a tennis ball. I like to use that example. So again, our knees will be closed. We're going to tuck in the toes and we're going to lift up. And so just like I showed a moment ago, in this way, don't look too much forward. Don't look at your hands, huh? Look kind of like in between your elbows. That's enough, yeah? And then send one leg. I'm going to do this time the other leg, and then lift up. And so you might stay there. You might just bring the right knee, the right foot. Well, in my case, it's the right leg. You might just bring the right leg towards you, the right knee towards you. Or you might go all the way up. Yeah? And I'm going to talk in a moment how we stay there. Yeah? Okay. So, this is another way. Another way that could help us to teach the body to work and to allow ourselves to come into the pose is, instead of having the arms just like that, because often the hands just come towards one another, right? It's very difficult for us to keep them in, is to use a block in between the hands. Now, I don't have a block because right now I'm not in my own home, but I found something here in this apartment, and I'm gonna show you how you can just be super creative and use something like a block. So, I have this box that I find here, it doesn't matter what it has inside, and it's more or less, as you can see, the width of my shoulders. This is the most important thing, right? More or less. It can be a bit less. The block is also a bit less, huh? Now, I like to place my thumbs against the block, okay, in this way. And not like I used to teach, actually, in this way. And like many teachers teach, and this is not that it's wrong, it's just that when I do like that with the hands will come off, okay? And so this would happen with your wrists and with your hands, and it would create a lot of tension and unbalanced pressure, if you may call it that way, on your wrists, right? And so, hands like so, thumbs against the blocks. We let the elbows, again, make sure that your elbows are not out, elbows in, tucking the toes, lifting yourselves up, and choose the leg that is more comfortable, but you always change the leg, so always work with the other leg, and hoppa, lift up, just a small lift, and then slowly maybe bring the other leg. Now notice that again, I'm not looking too much forward, huh? I'm looking kind of like in between my elbows or in between my forearms. That will be enough. Send your tailbone up and come down. Okay, now when you do whatever you do, now maybe you do it with me in the video, then that's okay. If you can't, you just try to lift up, that's fine, okay? You work on it, take your time. Yeah? All right. So these are ways of getting into the pose. Of course, there's many people who work with the wall. I personally do not like working with the wall because what happens is that you have a banana shape because you're a bit too far from the wall, and then you kind of rely a bit on your lumbar curve, and you lean into your back, you collapse actually into your back, and I don't feel that you find the strength to lift up. So I would suggest that you even stay like so. If let's say that you can't, you're not able, or you're afraid, either work with a friend to be as if they are your wall, or just work on this, and that's it. And maybe at a certain point, bend the leg and stay there for a moment, and maybe you come down and take your time, and eventually you'll find your balance, you find your strength, you'll find your trust. All right, so let's put this aside. And so when we want to work, let's say that we were able to already come up, but then we come up and we immediately fall, which has happened to me for many years. Those who know me and have been practicing alongside me, not only in my classes, but alongside me, would tell you how many times I would fall. So the first thing I would say, you fall, you laugh. Don't worry about it, okay? Don't be frustrated with it, just laugh about it, and that's it. Second thing that I would say is that it takes time. I still sometimes fall, okay? Even though nowadays it's a pose that I feel, or posture that I feel quite comfortable with, I still find myself falling from it a lot of times, right? So it doesn't matter, who cares, yeah? So in order to work on that hold of the pose, I would say that what we mostly need is to find the midline, to find the center line, and be comfortable there. So when I say be comfortable is often when we're inverted, then of course we have this kind of like a movement back, forth, maybe to the side. But if we are slowly finding the center line, and when I say comfortable, I mean we're used to still the subtle movement, but we find it and we use the core of the body, right, to bring ourselves back to that center line, then eventually we can find it also in Pincha Mayurasana. So naturally Pincha Mayurasana is quite a challenging pose to do it in, because we have only the forearms and we're not really used to balance ourselves on the forearms. So the best way that I find to start with is with a headstand, right? And so we're gonna again interlace our fingers, and we're gonna bring the crown of the head to the mat, okay? I personally, again, I love to do my headstand with the roots of the palms together. This is how I've learned it from my teacher, and even though it's not the very conventional way that in many classes and by many teachers, I find that it helps me to really root with my forearms, while when the head is in between the hands, we're supposed to do the same thing, but often what we do is we do this, and so we find ourselves just leaning into the head in that way, yeah? And so this will be my recommendation, my first recommendation. So have your palms together, try it, play with it, bring the crown of the head to the ground. Again, keep your knees close to you, close to your elbows, tuck in your toes, and lift your buttock up. Now, you lift yourself up into your headstand. If you can't do with the legs straight, you start with the legs bent. It doesn't matter, all right? Okay, if you can do it with the legs straight, you lift it with straight legs and you come all the way. You take your time and you stay there, and you stay there for a while. And after a while that you stay there and you play and you find that midline, and finding the midline without actually seeing yourself, it's not so easy. So first, of course, you can video yourself and just check it out, but it's actually really interesting to just tell yourself, okay, I want to now stack my feet just over my hip, and my hip over my shoulders, and my shoulders over the head. And that actually helps the body find that midline. And so you could stay there, or if you'd like, you're gonna try to push into the ground and just lift yourselves, the head off the mat, and just like try to stay there.
with the head not touching the ground. Now this is, for example, something that you can actually do against the wall when your knuckles are already touching the wall. So as long as you're not in a banana form, huh? So completely straight line. And then lower the head back down and bring the knees to your belly, lower them down and release for a moment, okay? So you can stay there in your child pose or in any form that makes you or that helps you to rest.
So this is one way to work on the midline. Another way to work on the midline is starting already with the head off the mat while looking in between your elbows, okay? So again, elbows, maybe forearms, but maybe better at the beginning to just look in between the elbows. That will be enough, yeah? And so the same way, you're gonna tuck in your toes, you're gonna lift up. And because this is much more challenging, then we might just lift one leg and then slowly just bring the other knee into the belly. Again, as you see, it doesn't always work the first time. So you find your balance and then you try to really again find that midline. Just find that midline and stay there. Work your elbows towards one another. Imagine they want to kiss one another. Feel the armpits looking towards your face. And then when you feel that you're done, then you just lower your knees down. Yeah? So, beyond that midline that we can play with in many different ways, what you would like to do is to really engage the right muscles. And so you don't want just to rely on leaning into the arms. You want to feel that you're that pushing, and that pushing is made more possible and easier when you basically bring your elbows towards one another. Now you're not really moving your elbows, but the fact that you're thinking of how can I bring those elbows, you know, like those gym machines that you do like so, it's the same thing, right? Just the hands are like this, or actually when you do pincha like that, and then you think of the elbows coming towards one another, and when you think of the elbows coming towards one another, you work out the right muscles that would help you engage and lift up. All right? And so super important when you do also a headstand, yeah, that you think of that elbows towards one another and push the forearms down to lift up. Yeah. So we talked about the midline, and I gave you a few options to work with the midline, yeah? And then we talked about the strength, right? How to cultivate or to engage the right muscles in our body to help us do that. The last thing that I mentioned before, but I want to emphasize here, is really that work of the core. So often, especially when we start looking a bit forward, so the head is not completely down, as in a headstand, what happens is that the rib cage moves out, right, and we lose it. So I'm gonna actually demonstrate what's happening. And it doesn't matter if you have your arms in the forearms or you have them like so, okay? It really doesn't matter. But I'm gonna show it right now with the forearms parallel. So I'm lifting one leg, doesn't matter which one. I try to lift. Let's say that I managed to come up, yeah? And now I do this, yeah? And then I really sink down, and usually what happens is that I would fall back, yeah? So this was completely my typical way of falling, and it took me a long time to remember. So ways to work on that sensation of hugging, yeah, you can either do some core work, of course, but core specifically with what some might call it a low navasana, which is either like so, or let me take myself a bit back, yeah, so either like so, or even take your arms behind you and just stay there and really feel it. Another way to really feel that midline is lie down and have your arms like so,
and just don't let the back kind of come into a back bending and let your rib cage up or collapse out, but pull them in, hug them in, really, really hug them in, right? And stay there and feel that low belly working. So this is another way, even though it's not completely the form, but to start feeling it. Yeah? And another way that you can actually use also the mirror is to stand up. I'm gonna use my accessory as if it's a block. So you could stand up and take your arms up and notice that this happens automatically. Again, some of us, it happens more than others. I have that tendency. And so what you wanna do is to hug them in, tailbone down, and then you bend your elbows. So just like as if you're in that forearm stand. And then maybe you even look a bit up. And notice that this is what you don't want to do. You want this. And so you can, for example, if the mirror was just on your side, you could look, just like I'm looking at you now, just for a moment to see what's happening. And then you come back up. All right. So these are just a few tips, and of course we can continuously work on that again and again, but these are the tips beyond just, of course, strengthen the body, build flexibility naturally, but to find or to engage the right muscles for you to actually hold there, yeah, and to bring your body to that awareness of the center line, yeah. So I hope that this helped, and please, I would love to hear from you, to see videos of you trying it out, to ask me questions via comments, via DM, whatever. So please, please, please try it. Let me know how it worked, and let's continue practicing. Have a good day.